Hello, welcome back, class. And we are entering in our final stage of the semester where we're going to cover today the topic of sacred space before we enter art and looking at body art and body modifications, and then finalizing with some controversial issues that are taking place in the world today. So when we talk about sacred space, what we're going to be looking at here is the human relationship with the landscape. Here's where we see the relationship between culture and geography, because landscapes can have great representation to a belief system and to a culture. And they could be considered places of sacred markers for the belief system or the religion. In other words, for many of these sacred landscapes, this is where the religion emerged. This is where the teacher, the prophet, the Messiah emerged, gave rise to this belief system, or may have been born here or died here. So there is a reason why this landscape becomes sacred. And in many cases, it not only does it hold a memory, a story. It could be the creation story for humanity or the creation story for the belief system. But that landscape also contains power. It is a sanctuary. It is a place where people journey to in a form of pilgrimage, as an act of devotion to the belief system, and to pay tribute to the memory of their belief system, their origins. This is perhaps where the ancestors reside. In some cases, they may even see this landscape as alive, as animated. And we will find, various examples of how people make offerings when they conduct this pilgrimage. And in many cases, we find what we would refer to as contagious magic. We had already covered contagious magic when we looked at how people conduct ill will, but also the complete opposite, when someone is doing a petition for a prayer in exchange for health or in exchange for a blessing, they often leave objects that are charged with a form of sacrifice. So they're sacrificial objects. They could be personal belongings. They could be a picture. They could be something that they made, that they leave as a form of respect and a form of perhaps a reciprocal relationship, as to have an exchange, a prayer, an offering in exchange for their petition. So these are places of worship and a home of the ancestors for many. And today, I'll briefly cover a few before I dive into the one we will elaborate on, and your question will be on. The question will be to the Huicholes and their sacred mountain of Wirikuta. All right. For Islam, Mecca in Saudi Arabia is the sacred space. For people of this religion, perhaps once in their lifetime, if they are in good health and are able to do this journey, it is an act of devotion called Haji, where they travel to visit Mecca and participate in the rituals. And there is a whole elaborate system that takes place here as a form of devotion. And behind this wall is the sacred black stone that geologists have, pondered on what it's made out of, where it comes from. For some, they've mentioned it's actually a meteorite, and that was given to the founder Abraham. Others refer to it is a stone that goes as far back as the first humans that were created. But nonetheless, this location is sacred because this is where the Prophet Muhammad pilgrimaged and gave birth to reintroducing this monotheistic belief system. And this is why this is the birth of Islam. This place is very important. And just as it is for many other religions, everyone has their place of origins where their belief system, their religion emerged from. In the case for Catholicism, just like in Islam, if the person is able to do this pilgrimage in their lifetime, if they're in good health and they can financially do it, many people visit St. Peter's Basilica. This is in Rome, and the nation state in the Vatican, because this is where the birth of Catholicism as a form of religion emerged. This is where the apostles and martyrs, where they were crucified, defending Christianity. And so here we have the tomb of St. Peter's, and this is where the Pope, the representative for this religion, gives the masses and so forth. Other people visit the Vatican because of its architecture, of the art and the history. But nonetheless, this is also a place of devotion and pilgrimage, also considered a sacred site for those that practice Catholicism. In Mexico, Mexico, as we have seen, we always see kind of a syncretism practice of Catholicism as it was introduced with the conquest. And we know Mexico has diverse ethnic groups, indigenous ethnic groups throughout the region that continue their practice today, their language, their culture, their way of life. But after the Spaniards arrived and tried also with the priest and tried to introduce Christianity, there was a lot of resistance, as we've seen other examples, in the case of the Mayas. But this area, this is central Mexico. This is the area where we have also a variety of ethnic groups, and the Aztecs were the Mesoamerican groups that occupied this area. It was this sacred mountain was actually the home and pilgrimage of an Aztec goddess, and that we have here, Tonantzin. And Tonantzin was she was not only was going to this mountain, as we had seen mountains and sacred landscape, the places where the gods or the ancestors reside, but she was considered the gods representative of the moon, of fertility. So she had a great influence for Aztec culture. They were already doing pilgrimages there to the sacred mountain. Well, in an effort to convert the natives of this area, the Aztecs, here we have the story of Juan Diego. Juan Diego was an Aztec Indian, and he had converted to Christianity, and thus he was given his Christian name, Juan Diego. And when the Virgin Guadalupe appeared to him, and in the mountain of Tepeyac, so here we have the Cerro Tepeyac in the 1600s, and here we see where the basilica was created. And so in his in this appearance of the Virgin, she appeared to him in a time of distress for the area. There was an epidemic of smallpox, and smallpox, when you study history, and you'll find that smallpox is a European disease that was introduced to the Americas. Native American cultures of the American continent did not have immunity or had ever experienced smallpox. This was a new disease that killed many. And this also facilitated this ability to take over territory as, people were dying. But so in this time, there was another outbreak of smallpox. The first outbreak was severe and brought down the Aztec Empire. And by then, people have already been converted, and there's a transition, still many in resistance. And in the case of Juan Diego, he had already converted, but his family was sick of smallpox. And in going to this mountain, he saw the appearance of the Virgin. And she was very particular. She was different than the Virgin Mary in the sense that she was of dark-colored skin. So, and she presented herself to him and provided proof that he can bring to the church of her appearance. And so she promised that protection and health, and miraculously it is associated with her appearance that smallpox began to diminish in the area. But nonetheless, when the Catholic Church integrated her and presented her to the natives, there was mass conversion to Catholicism. And until today, to this day, this is one of the most sacred places for Mexicans to conduct a pilgrimage. And people from all over the world, but in particular all over the Mexican region, in one time in their lifetime, they feel it is their responsibility, and as part of the devotion, even if there's a syncretic form of practice in Catholicism, to come give pilgrimage to the Virgin of Guadalupe. They consider the Virgin of Guadalupe to be the mother goddess and protector of Mexico. And so you will find her image throughout, and very renowned, and you'll see, interesting, this mountain was already a place of pilgrimage dedicated to the Aztec god Tonantzin. Okay? All right. Now, diving to our talk for today, we are going to cover the situation with the Huicholes and their sacred mountain of Wirikuta. Now, I want to introduce the term territoriality. This is where people claim access, claim their rights to this site. These are landmarks where members of the group claim access to the land and their resources. The way they claim it is by conducting rituals and pilgrimages, claiming access to this ancestral inheritance. And for the Wirikutas, for the Huicholes, this whole area that is highlighted here is considered sacred. And they conduct pilgrimages throughout this region and conclude here in the sacred mountain of Wirikuta, which is by San Luis Potosí, north of San Luis Potosí, in a little small town known as the ghost town of Mexico, called Real de Catorce. And here we see how we're going to see examples of how people reclaim their space. And by conducting this pilgrimage for the Huicholes, they are recreating their story of origins. All right, so this territory, as we were covering, it covers a large geographical area, and the Huicholes have become an international a group that has led their fight for access to this territory to lead an international effort. And I will explain the conflict that they faced and that they fought and that they're still fighting today. And it has to do, remember, we're looking at culture and geography. In some cases, the sacred space is located in just one area. But for some cultures, as in the case of the Huicholes, their pilgrimage, their act of devotion that they do yearly, and that they consider it, very necessary. And they have been doing this pilgrimage even pre-Mesoamerican times. They are they're a pre-Aztec culture, and they still continue the use of language and their use of ritual and pilgrimage throughout these regions to culminate in this place, the sacred mountain of Wirikuta. So what the Huicholes have faced in this region, which is central Mexico, northern central Mexico, in recreating their story of origins, where the ancestors emerged from the sea and then transformed into the elements that they use, to becoming the deer that led the first ancestors to the area of Wirikuta. The deer sacrificed itself and transformed into the peyote plant. And here we have a couple of issues taking place. The Huicholes use a psychedelic cactus known as peyote. They are the guardians of this sacred plant because they've been using it for immemorable time. While they don't they're not a calendar culture such as the Mayas that were kept great records of time. The Huicholes have been there for many years, even before the Aztecs, even before the empire, the Mesoamerican empire that ruled this region. This is an ethnic group that preserves their traditions, their language, their way of life, and their dressing and their offerings, and this is their religion. And so the sacred mountain of Wirikuta is where their yearly pilgrimage finalizes, and where they make their final offerings. So there's three elements that in Huichol cosmology. They're also very renowned for their art. They do the little small beads, which are called chaquiras, and they are able to make these very colorful artwork, from murals to jewelry, you see it in their dress, in their paintings, and so forth. You will always find these three elements: the peyote, the cactus plant, the deer, and also representative of maize, the corn. And here they consider the deer, the fire, the air, the sun, and other elements here as their ancestors, the givers of life, that led their ancestors here on earth. So every year they cover this vast geographical region. Before, they used to do it by foot. It would take them over a month to be able to meet up in the sacred mountain of Wirikuta. Today, they conduct these pilgrimages still in groups, but they use transportation. And they travel across, again, many regions where they have found a challenge to access certain sacred spaces. There are, in their pilgrimage, and there are certain locations within their four cardinal points that they start, that where they have to undergo a process of purification before they reach the sacred mountain of Wirikuta. There are certain water holes and certain deserts and certain mountains that they must visit, and each one is a preparation, an initiation. And throughout this process, they are symbolically hunting deer. And in the symbolic hunt, the deer, remember, transformed into the peyote. And so they are consuming peyote throughout this pilgrimage as a form of spiritual nourishment and purification. Now, when they're covering such large geographical locations, they are facing challenging with private territories, private lands, ranchers, that have fenced off the area, that don't allow them to enter, and also the violence in Mexico, with the drug trafficking, and in certain areas has made it more challenging to do these pilgrimage. But again, they cover 4 different states throughout the region, and in every location, they're paying tribute to their gods. So this is very important for not only their cosmology, as they're recreating their creation myth, coming from the ocean, entering the land, and finishing, culminating in the sacred mountain of Wirikuta. But it's also a form of offering for their agriculture, to bring water to the corn. And by conducting these these rituals, when they arrive in Wirikuta and it is well received, then they are able to return to their towns, to their villages, and they're bringing the rain with them. So, as Mayarov notes, the maize, which is the corn, cannot grow without the deer blood. The deer cannot be sacrificed to the sun until after the peyote hunt. The maize ceremony, which brings the rains needed to make the maize grow, cannot be held without the peyote from Wirikuta. So you see how this geographical area and the pilgrimages are vital to their cosmology. And they have been conducting this for hundreds of years, even, before, like I said, before the Mesoamerica Aztec culture controlled the area, and even obviously before the conquest and before Mexico became a nation. So they are one of the few practicing traditions that have this psychedelic plant. They are the only ones in Mexico that are allowed to use this plant without having any legal consequence. But in recent years, they have, like I mentioned, not only do they have this challenge of conducting this pilgrimage and entering private land that now belongs to ranchers and areas that may be dangerous because of the violence of the cartels. But in recent years, the Mexican government gave land to a Canadian company, a Canadian mining company. And the land that was given a concession was the sacred mountain of Wirikuta. And so this became a very renowned struggle in Mexico still today, where the Huicholes actually began to exercise their legal right based on the Mexican Constitution that recognizes that it is a multi-ethnic country, and that there are many ethnic groups that still continue their practices and their belief systems, and therefore those access to practice, belief systems, and tradition must be protected under the Mexican Constitution. And therefore the Huicholes led a national and international struggle to reclaim their land rights. And this is where we get this idea of territoriality. The way they see territory is very different than the way we practice territory. You buy a piece of land, you get title, you can fence off, this is your private land. Many ethnic cultures do not view land like that. They view land as a complete being, as a whole, and it is animated, and it belongs. They have the right to access it. They have the right to use their resources, to use the water for purification, to enter this territory in their pilgrimage, to be able to access the peyote plant from these deserts. And so they led their fight not only with reclaiming their constitutional right to usos y costumbres, customs and traditions, but they were also able to gain a global support. And this area also has another challenge. The Mexican desert, and leading up, the Sierra Madre, leading up to the mountain of Wirikuta, this is where the largest concentration of this cactus plant emerges. And this also gave rise to what we call narco-tourism. Now, narco-tourism, we're not talking about the drug cartels or this form of illegal transportation or use of drugs. No, narco-tourism is where people seek out to these locations to have a psychedelic trip, to use the cactus plant, which is, it has alkalines, it has mescaline, and therefore it gives an altered state of consciousness. But the way it is used, it is considered for the Huicholes to be a sacrilege. They go through an elaborate preparation of purification, of offerings, of prayer, of music, and devotion, and they are led by their spiritual leader, which we'll use loosely, shaman, also known as the maracame. They're the ones that guide them. And they guide them in through, like I said, a period of confession, of sacrifice, this journey, this act of devotion. And so for them, it is something sacred. And the way they also hunt the peyote, they also make sure that they, that they are able to grow it, that it regenerates, that it will not, they don't take more than they need, in other words. And with this rise of narco-tourism, cosmic, people seeking a cosmic experience, not only is it a sacrilege, but it also puts the peyote plant in danger, as the way, they just gather the peyotes, they don't know which one, it might be too young, or, they might, the way they take out the root, it will not grow again, and so forth. So they put the essence of their culture, their belief system in danger. The Huicholes consider this pilgrimage to be vital. If they do not conduct this pilgrimage, if this tradition would end, not only will it risk their way of life, their agriculture, but for them, they would consider it the end of their world. And in this effort to save the mountain of Wirikuta and the area, because the mining company was going to mine all around it, and the ecological disaster that it would cause would affect not the flora and the fauna, and of course, the Huicholes. But the struggle also had to do with the local people. Not only did the Mexican government provide this concession to the mining company, but for example, in this town where the mountain of Wirikuta is, you have to insert through Real de Catorce, unless you're coming from, other parts of the desert. But the easiest way to get there is through Real de Catorce, which is considered the ghost town of Mexico. It is the ghost town of Mexico because it used to be a small mining town where they mined silver and other minerals, and then they depleted the resource, and the mining companies left. But the workers that were brought by these mining companies remained there. This was their home. There was generations of miners that gave rise to this little town in the mountain. And so when the mining company left, all they were left were with their access was tourism. They had their small plots of agriculture, and again, this is the desert. Water is very scarce, so it's not easy to cultivate. It's not a very fertile land. And so their financial resources mainly came from tourism, a form of narco-tourism, a form of also ethnic tourism. There's a church there where people do pilgrimages during this Easter holiday. And so this is, it's a very quiet, very pretty little town where they've also made movies there. I think there was a movie by Brad Pitt called The Mexican or something like that that was filmed there. And people visit it, just because it's considered, like I said, the ghost town of Mexico, just because it's so quiet and beautiful to be out there in at such a high altitude. But the locals wanted the mining company to begin mining there because that would have a source of income. And here's where the Huicholes reached out to the world and gained global support. There's many films made, and there's one film in particular, and that I would recommend that you see. I'm just going to play the trailer for you, but you can rent it. It's not available on Canopy or YouTube or any of the other sites. You rent it. And this is, they document their struggle. And in 2012, there was a mass mobilization, international mobilization. Artists, filmmakers, people from all over the world traveled to this area in support for the Huicholes. And they were able to temporarily stop the permits that were given to this company. But it is something that is not finalized. In other words, they're able to halt it, but they know that they will face this fight again. And this comes to the public now discourse on culture and geography, territoriality. Who has access to this land? Who has the rights of ownership to this land? If this particular group, this ethnic group, has been using its resources and claims it as part of their sacred territory, of their story of origins, and they have been there even before, the creation of this nation, this brings up a big debate on territoriality. And it has, the Mexican Constitution comes into play here. So let's look at a quick trailer for this film, and I highly recommend that you view it. And just as a review, let's look at the struggles that the Huicholes have. They have the mining company. They have the debate on access to territory from private landowners, from the ranchers. Some ranchers have blocked off the area to water holes that they consider to be vital. These are water holes that have been there for what they would consider timeless, and they must be able to access and give tribute to this area, to communicate with their ancestors in preparation that leads up to Wirikuta. So we have land rights, private land rights, ranchers, the drug cartels, the violence in Mexico that has interrupted a lot of the pilgrimage that people do. And also we have the rise of narco-tourism. More of people seeking to have this altered state of consciousness experience, but taking it with it's considered a sacrilege. In this place, I have visited Real de Catorce several times, and often I have seen tourist guides come in and bring young people very much out of it, and just guide them to, they take them to the desert, which they kind of camp out there for the day, and they feed them. They collect a lot of peyote for them, and people just consume it with an excess amount that will make them sick. If there's no preparation, there's no understanding for what is taking place. And if, the way, in contrast to the way that Huicholes prepare for it is very great. And people of the town, the ones that provide the hostels, because it's very inexpensive, they get upset. They get upset because they feel responsible for these tourists that are visiting the town. And if they're being brought back and left at their hotel or their hostel, the owners, many of these places are like houses that people open up rooms to visitors, and so they feel very much responsible for their well-being, and they are also against this use of tourism. The Huicholes will probably be the first to call the police and denounce this if they see someone consuming peyote, because again, it is a sacrilege for them. Okay, all right. So let's take a look at this short trailer.
Soy Clemente Ramírez. Me vine hace 7 años a la ciudad de Guadalajara, Jalisco, México. Se podría decir que con mis compañeros somos como cualquier grupo de estudiantes de la ciudad. Pero a la vez tengo otro nombre, otra vida. En mi tierra soy Ubeni Temay, hijo de Urramuire, Maracame de la comunidad birrárica de La Laguna, y de Turama, mi madre. Somos los Birraritari, un pueblo que a pesar de la conquista española y el avance de la sociedad mestiza mexicana, mantiene su cultura, sus ritos, su forma ancestral de vida. Los de afuera nos llaman Huicholes, los últimos guardianes del peyote.
La peregrinación de Wirikuta es de tiempos inmemoriales.
Este peregrinaje que se hace no es la primera vez que lo estamos haciendo. Ese viene muy antiguo, donde nace del mundo, donde nace del universo.
Porque todo lo que hay ahí en Wirikuta, todos son sagrados, sean animales, sean plantas. Para nosotros, todos son sagrados.
Necesitamos una fuente de trabajo estable, y aquí nuestra cultura y siempre ha sido la minería.
Tendríamos capacidad de generar 500 empleos directos y 1.500 empleos directos para la comunidad durante 15 años.
Pues dicen que van a trabajar subterráneo, que por arriba no se va a ver nada de eso. ¿Qué creen, que somos pendejos?
Pues Wirikuta para mí, la Sierra Sagrada de los Huicholes, es la casa de los dioses.
Nuestra preocupación con la minera es que nos diga si vas a hacer perforaciones profundas, porque su proyecto es muy ambicioso, muy grande. ¿Qué tanto riesgo tenemos de que nuestros mantos acuíferos sean afectados?
Me parecen en ese sentido unos maestros. Nos están diciendo qué están haciendo ustedes para cuidar la vida.
Yeah, so they were able to halt it with the assistance of also international groups. Groups came in and talked to the locals that were supporting the mining projects. And as she mentioned, if they had presented a plan to not touch the surface of the land, that they were going to be mining underground. Well, water is scarce. This is a desert, and the few water sources that they had would be contaminated. So educators from Mexico and also international came and would give courses and demonstrate what were going to be the ecological results or effects with this mining, because they would be left with the consequence. If the project was only for about 15 years and they were going to generate about 500 jobs, but it was going to be an ecological disaster that they would be left with. And in the case of the Huicholes, it would destroy their sacred site. So for now, they were able to stop it, put it on hold, and as this current Mexican president is very sympathetic to indigenous cultures, nonetheless, like I said, this is not something that is permanent. It is simply on hold. And the Huicholes, though, have reclaimed their rights and access under the Mexican Constitution to continue their traditions. And they have now become world renowned. And so we hope that they are able to continue protecting their sacred site. And, we will follow as things emerge. But I recommend that documentary, and nonetheless, you have an overview of the current situation. All right, I'll stop there. If you have any questions, please email me at any time. Thank you. Okay, I don't know how short it is.